Desperate residents were screaming for help as they stood at windows. At least 74 people have been treated in hospital. Downing Street says Theresa May is deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life.
Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about the horrific fire that took place in Grenfell Tower in June 2017. So this was the deadliest structural fire in the United Kingdom since the 1988 Piper Alpha oil platform disaster, and the worst residential fire since the Blitz. I remember watching this on the news at the time and just being in utter disbelief of how long the fire actually took to put out. But anyway, let's get straight into this case. Grenfell Tower was a council housing complex in North Kensington. Standing at 67 metres and 24 stories tall, it was designed by Clifford Worden and Associates in 1967 and was approved for construction in 1917, being built between 1972 to 1974. Grenfell contained 120 1 to 2 bedroom flats. The higher 20 stories were residential and the lower 4 stories were originally used for non-residential purposes. But later on, 2 of these lower floors were converted into flats also, making it a total of 129 flats and 600 maximum residents. Grenfell was meant to operate under a stay-put policy in the event of a fire. So if a fire broke out in one flat, thick walls and fire doors would contain the fire long enough for the fire service to bring it under control. Only those in the affected flat would need to evacuate. Essentially, it was assumed that a full evacuation would never be necessary. But there wasn't a centrally activated fire alarm and only a single central staircase because apparently UK regulations do not require a second. There was actually a fire in 2010 in the lobby, but it was quickly extinguished. The apartment block underwent a renovation in 2015, in which it received, among other things, new aluminium cladding. The cladding aimed to improve heating and energy efficiency and how the building looked on the external. A cheap type of cladding was used after an alternative with better fire resistance was refused due to the cost. Residents had expressed significant safety concerns before the fire. The Grenfell Action Group highlighted major safety problems and criticised the council for neglecting fire safety and building maintenance. A 2012 fire risk assessment showed that the firefighting equipment hadn't been checked, let alone changed, for up to 4 years. Fire extinguishers had expired and some had condemned written on them because of their age. Concerns were also raised about exposed gas pipes in the months leading up to the fire. The Grenfell Action Group made numerous attempts to contact those in charge, but they never heard a response. In fact, 2 women living there, Mariam El Gawari and Nadia Chowker, were threatened with legal action after they campaigned for better fire safety. The Grenfell Action Group stated that only a catastrophic event will expose the ineptitude and incompetence of KCTMO. This stood for the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation. And they're right, these 2 women would later die in the fire, aged 27 and 34. In June 2016, an independent assessor highlighted 40 serious fire safety issues at Grenfell Tower and recommended action to be taken within weeks. In November that year, the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority served a fire deficiency notice requiring action from KCTMO by May the next year. It just makes me wonder why money can be so much more important than people's lives. I have never understood that. At around 12:50 AM on the 14th of June 2017, a fridge freezer caught fire in flat 16 on the 4th floor. The flat's resident, Bihalo Kabid, was awoken by a smoke alarm, and after discovering smoke coming from his kitchen, Kabid alerted his neighbours and called the fire brigade at 12:54 AM. The first 2 fire engines arrived at 12:55 and 12:59 AM. At this time, the incident commander, Michael Dowden, said the fire was a glow in the window. A further 2 pumps were then dispatched. Any residents who called the fire service were told to stay in their flats unless affected, as each flat should be fireproofed from its neighbours. The firefighters entered flat 16 at 1:07 AM and initially searched the bedrooms. During this time though, the fire began to penetrate the window frame, and within minutes the cladding panels had caught alight. The firefighters entered the kitchen at 1:14 and firefighter Daniel Brown described seeing an isolated curtain of flame from about 2 to 3 feet in the air to the ceiling. They then began to tackle the blaze. Michael Dowden, who was outside the building, offered to spray the cladding with a covering water jet but the crew manager, Christopher Secret, was worried that the resulting steam would scald the 2 firefighters about to enter the flat. At 1:15, a firefighter discovered smoke in flat 26, which was directly above flat 16. Another discovered smoke on the 5th and the 6th floors, and outside large quantities of debris began falling from the building. The flames were reported to have spread up the side of the building at a terrifying rate. Attempts to fight the fire with an external jet were unsuccessful, as it was mostly burning behind the waterproof rain screen. By 1:30, a rising column of flames had reached the roof and the fire grew out of control.
Oh my.
The fire brigade escalated its response at this time, and 25 pumps were at the scene by 1:35. Danny Cotton, the commissioner of the London Fire Brigade, also began driving to the scene from her home in Kent. The Metropolitan Police Service were also called at 1:24 to manage the gathering crowd. 5 minutes later, the London Ambulance Service were also called. Due to the stay put policy, many residents were told to remain in their flats by emergency services, only to become trapped as the fire blazed out of control. Due to fire doors not closing properly, thick poisonous smoke began to enter the stairwell, and more than half of those still trapped at 1:58 were killed, while 48 were rescued between 1:58 and 3:58. On their mission to save the trapped residents, communicating over radio was affected by noise, the amount of radio talk, and possibly the concrete building. So instead, details of trapped residents were written down on slips of paper and were given from the command unit to the firefighters on the 2nd floor. Incoming firefighters were assigned flats and the people they needed to rescue. The firefighters encountered thick smoke, zero visibility, and extreme heat when they climbed above the 4th floor. It had got to the point where some residents had moved to escape the smoke. 3 firefighters who went to rescue a 12-year-old girl on the 20th floor couldn't find her as she'd moved to the 23rd floor. She later died in this location. Another 2 firefighters were sent to the 14th floor to rescue 1 person, but instead found 8 people. Only 4 of these people managed to escape. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing trapped residents turning on and off their lights and waving from windows to attract help, some of which were holding children, and there were reports of people screaming from all sides of the tower.
Oh, people are screaming help. Wow.
Eyewitnesses reported some people jumping to their deaths. 1 person is known to have made a blanket rope and managed to escape that way, and frequent explosions were heard, which were reported to be from the gas lines in the building. Outside, operations were hindered by falling debris, including burning pieces of cladding. Due to this danger, the police moved crowds away from the building as a safety precaution. The NPS Territorial Support Group was also present, and they provided riot shields to protect the firefighters from the falling debris. Shortly after 2 a.m, a major incident was declared and 40 fire engines were on site. In total, 250 firefighters were attempting to control the fire. The fire brigade had actually broken their own safety protocols by entering a large building without knowing whether it was in danger of structural collapse. It wasn't until the following afternoon that structural engineers were able to assess the structure and determine that it wasn't in danger of collapse. By 2:20 a.m, the level of smoke in the stairwell was a threat to life, though some survivors did escape beyond this point, which is crazy. At 2:47, the stay put policy was abandoned, finally. After this point, only 36 more residents managed to escape. By sunrise, firefighters were still busy fighting the fire and attempting rescues. At 4:14, police addressed the crowd of onlookers and urgently instructed them to contact anyone they knew was trapped in the building. If they were able to reach them via phone, to instruct them they must try to self-evacuate and not wait for the fire brigade. And by 4:44, all sides of the building had been affected. Only 2 further rescues took place after this, 1 resident being rescued at 6:05 a.m. and the last at 8:07 a.m. At a news conference that afternoon, the London Fire Brigade reported that firefighters had rescued 65 people from the building. 74 people were confirmed by the NHS to be in 6 hospitals across London, with 20 of them in critical care. The fire continued to burn on the upper floors and wasn't brought under control until 1:14 a.m. on the 15th of June, but the fire could only be declared extinguished on the evening of the 16th of June. In total, the fire caused 72 deaths, including one who died in the hospital a day later from inhalation of fire fumes, and another who died in January 2018. Of those who died, 5 were students at the Kensington Aldridge Academy. The youngest of those known to have been killed was Lena Belkadi at just 6 months old. A pregnant survivor also lost her baby through stillbirth as a result of the fire. A total of 151 homes were destroyed in the tower and the surrounding area. People from surrounding buildings were evacuated due to concerns that the tower might collapse, which I didn't even think of, but of course that's going to be a worry. The fire also severely affected 3 low-rise finger blocks adjoining Grenfell Tower. Their residents were also evacuated. In his report to the public inquiry, Luke Bisbee, Professor of Engineering at Edinburgh University, said evidence strongly supports the theory that the polyethylene material in the cladding was the primary cause of the fire's spread. A number of other flammable materials, including a polyurethane polymer foam insulation board, which predated the refurbishment, were also present and may have contributed. His report also suggests that vertical cavities within the cladding structure played a role in the spread of the fire too. Fire expert Dr. Barbara Lane identified combustible materials used in the refurbishment of the windows as another factor in allowing the fire to spread, and that exposed gas pipes installed in 2016 were another contributor, while none of the flat doors met current fire resistance standards. It's just a recipe for disaster. It really, really is. The building's smoke extraction system was also not working, and firefighters experienced problems with the water supply because there was no wet riser, a water-filled pipe running up the building to be used in the event of a fire. And if that wasn't enough, previous works on the lifts left them unfit for evacuating vulnerable residents. Beyond physical injury, the fire was a traumatic event which had a psychological impact on the residents, the emergency service workers, and the public. On the 26th of July 2017, at the 4th public meeting of the Grenfell response team, a local volunteer reported that there had been at least 20 attempts in North Kensington since the fire, one of which did take place. Around 80 firefighters and Metropolitan Police officers were reported to be suffering from their experiences. London Fire Brigade Commissioner Danny Cotton defended the heroism of these emergency service workers, and an on-call counsellor was made available to them. Cotton told LBC Radio that she was also undergoing counselling. An extra 4 full-time counsellors were employed and 60 volunteer counsellors were brought in. All the firefighters who attended Grenfell were given a psychological health check. The BBC reported that the London Fire Brigade used its reserve budget to bring counselling staff back to 2008 levels. Psychologists worked at Kensington Aldridge Academy. Measures have been taken to protect student welfare, such as shielding classroom windows overlooking the tower. However, quite opposite to this, the Metropolitan Police Service assigned 250 detectives to the fire, placing additional workload and stress on a force that was investigating recent terrorist attacks, including the London Bridge and Finsbury Park attacks. Grenfell Tower was insured by Protector Forest Ring ASA for £20 million, but the direct costs of the fire were slightly higher than this. In 2023, The Guardian estimated the total cost at almost £1.2 billion. This means that the direct costs of the fire are 4,000 times higher than the £293,000 saved by the tower's builders by using cheap cladding. I know that is not true justice, but it's definitely a start. Since the fire, there has been a focus on improved building regulations for the future, particularly with residential high-rise blocks. In October 2018, the government announced plans to ban flammable cladding on newly built buildings over 18 metres tall, as well as those for certain types of buildings like schools, care homes and student housing. However, the Fire Brigades Union have argued that it should be entirely banned, and I completely agree, and that a ban should also apply to existing buildings, which I also agree with. Like, let's just reduce the risk for all buildings, yeah? By February 2021, the government had pledged £5 billion towards the remediation of fire safety problems, though still not enough for the costs involved, many of which were being borne by flat owners who thought they had been built legally. In Australia, authorities decided to remove similar cladding from all of its tower blocks. So why can't we do the same? Apparently every tower block built in Melbourne in the last 20 years had the cladding. A month after Grenfell, the external cladding of a newly built Hilton hotel in the Netherlands was partly removed over concerns of fire safety. An external video system was also installed specifically to detect fires. On the 27th of July 2017, police said they had reasonable grounds to suspect that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea and the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation may have committed corporate manslaughter. You think? Following publication on the 4th of September 2024, Metropolitan Police said it would take at least 12 to 18 months before cases could be presented. The Crown Prosecution Service stated that it did not expect any charging decisions before the end of 2026. I am hoping that these guilty parties are brought to justice next year. I really do. Grenfell Tower itself is now covered in a protective wrap supported by scaffolding to protect forensic evidence, but later to allow for it to be taken down. In July 2024, the Royal Institute of British Architects started selecting design teams to create a memorial. And in January 2025, the names of 5 teams were announced who were shortlisted to design the future memorial on the tower's site. The plans to demolish the site were confirmed on the 7th of February 2025. The building has been closed off by temporary hoarding for 7 years. So when deconstruction does begin, specialists will work from the top down, dismantling the tower floor by floor, and this is expected to take 2 years. I'm not gonna lie, when I was writing the script for this video, my eyes filled with tears a few times, just imagining the chaos, but also the humanity of everyone coming together to try and face this crisis. As I said earlier, I just remember watching this and being so shocked that it went on for as long as it did. But now that we understand why it spread so quickly, I think they just weren't expecting a fire of that magnitude. I really do hope that the guilty parties are brought to justice, and I understand why the investigations have taken this long, because you have to be certain and thorough when doing that kind of work. But as always, let me know your thoughts on this particular case of this awful tragedy. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video.